Hello and welcome. I appreciate everyone joining today. We're just going to give it another few seconds here before we start. Let a few more people jump in. But excited to have everybody here. Thanks for joining. And we will get started on our presentation today, which is why Microsoft ignores most partners and how the smart ones get pulled into deals. It's a topic very near and dear to my heart, and I'm very passionate about it. So excited for our call today. Give it another few seconds, and then we'll jump right in. Okay, let's get started. And I want to start with something very simple. There are lots of capable Microsoft partners who put in real effort. They go and they earn the certifications, they join the programs, they submit the referrals, and they build the relationships. And yet, that level of engagement from Microsoft sellers just doesn't always match what you're putting in. That level of effort that you're putting in and day out, it's just not met with that same level of energy from the Microsoft sellers for most partners. And for some of us, that shows up in either the feeling of inconsistency. Some of us, it may feel like it's just random and you don't really know what's going on or why. And for others, it feels like they're simply just not in the right conversations or they're not in any conversations. So if any part of that feels familiar, this session is for you. And this session is going to matter for you. But what I do want to share is that this session is going to be operating at the strategic level. It's not the mechanics. We're not going to cover a walkthrough of Partner Center today. We're not doing a training on how to submit referrals. It's not about adding more activity to your plate. It's about understanding the system that Microsoft sellers actually operate inside. Because when that system is visible, effort does not reliably translate into visibility. So again, when that system is invisible to you as the partner, everything you pour into it is not reliably going to translate into an outcome for you. And at RYZE Partners, we've watched this pattern happen and repeat across partners of every size. Whether you're a MSP, a systems integrator, whether you focus on data and AI, or you're a modern work partner, the one thing we do see across all of these different partner types is that you'll have good customer outcomes. You have real capabilities, and still you get limited pull into active deals from Microsoft. You see limited or very few conversations that actively turn into deals. But once you see how that system actually works, a lot of what feels inconsistent, it's going to change for you. It'll stop feeling random. It'll stop feeling inconsistent when you see the system and when you see how things actually operate inside of Microsoft. And so to understand why, what I'd like to do is start by looking at the pattern most partners eventually find themselves in. And that is that they stay invisible. So if you're here, you're probably not new to the Microsoft ecosystem. As you're running your business, you're investing in this ecosystem, you're following the rules, and you're still not seeing that payoff from Microsoft, whether that is calls, whether that's referrals, whether that's connections. It's not landing. And it isn't because you're bad at what you do. It's because that visibility we talked about inside Microsoft works differently than most partners expect. So to understand why, what I'd like to do is start by talking about effort. And many of you will know this. This shouldn't be new to most of you, but you've gone out and you've earned the certifications. You've joined the programs, you've attended the briefings, GPS has put out content, you've consumed that content, the Global Partner Solutions Group. You've even submitted referrals. You might have even started to build some relationships. And you're taking it very seriously. You're investing real time, you're investing real money. You train your team around it. You rally the troops around your Microsoft motion. At the end of the day, you're treating this motion like it matters. And underneath all of that, whether you say it out loud or it's just in the back of your mind, if you do the things Microsoft says matter, you expect that momentum should follow. But here's the part most partners rarely say out loud. And I know I'm guilty of this, starting back in 2015 when I built my own company, and prior to that as an individual contributor in Microsoft Partners, I would say you can do it, all of it. We went and we got all these certs, we did all these things, but we still felt invisible. And I want to be clear here, it wasn't that we felt rejected. That was something I want to be super clear about. It was that we felt invisible, and that's very different. No one ever said no. They just said nothing. It was like I didn't exist. So, and I know as partners, you aren't careless. You aren't ignoring the rules. You weren't there misaligned on paper. The activity was there. The effort that you put in every day, and I know this is true for me as well, was real. And still, the system, the mothership, didn't respond. And for me, that's where the tension really started to build. Not because I failed or you failed, but because we did, you did what was supposed to do or was supposed to work. And that gap kept repeating, it kept getting larger. There was less traction. There was, compared to the work we were putting in, there was just nothing happening. And I really was at that point questioning, and maybe you're in the same boat here, is that, are we doing the wrong thing? You start to question your positioning, your relationships, your execution, and the issue isn't effort. It was something else entirely different. And this is where I want to really dive into my story and kind of how this came to fruition for me. And I want to be clear, it didn't happen in a dramatic way. It wasn't this big cataclysmic event. It was really the opposite. It was almost like it happened in this quiet, aha moment. I remember sitting around after another quarter where we had done everything we were supposed to do. We were still continuing to maintain our certs. We were aligning with the new programs. I mean, we all struggle from this, that Microsoft changes the programs quite consistently. We know every July something's new. Regardless, we continued to align with the programs. We had active relationships. Both myself and my partner in our former jobs had these relationships that we brought to the new company. And we knew things were important, like submitting referrals. So we were 100% confident that we hadn't broken anything. But what we also realized is that nothing had accelerated either. We were kind of stagnant. We were not moving the ball forward in a meaningful way. And being Canadian, I'll use the hockey stick reference here, that we had this sort of flat line curve, or very, very sort of subtle up to the right. And what we really wanted to develop was around that hockey stick curve where it was up and then a sharp up to the right. So I remember thinking, if we're doing all these right things, why does it feel like we're still on the outside? Again, not rejected, Nobody said no to us. Nobody said, no, we'll never work with you. It was just nothing. We were never pulled into anything. That's when I asked the question I didn't really want to ask myself. And that question was this: what if the effort that we're putting in isn't the lever that helps us in the Microsoft ecosystem, that helps us in the eyes of the Microsoft field? What if the system doesn't actually know how to categorize us? And this is the thing this is where that aha moment really hit me. It was this idea or concept of how does the system categorize us? And back in 2015, when I started this company with my business partner, we came to market as a modern work partner. If you remember back in the day, if you're around back then in this ecosystem, modern work was the thing. But modern work, even back in 2015, was still a massively broad category. And it included a lot of different things. And that's when it started to dawn on me that, are we really relevant to Microsoft? Because inside that large organization we call Microsoft, ambiguity is super expensive. If the seller couldn't instantly see, when to use us, why to use us, and then how we reduce the risk, that was the flaw that could have been fatal for us had we not realized that flaw. Because Microsoft, they are defaulting to someone they already have placed. And that's when it clicked. We weren't being rejected. We were completely being misclassified. We were lumped into this massive pool of partners called modern work partners. And they just didn't know what to do with us. And once I had that realization, or that really what I would call the epiphany that I had in this business, that realization changed everything. Because if the issue is effort, I'm just going to work harder. And I know each and every one of you is the same. You're going to work harder. If you knew that was the key to success was just more work, we'd all put more work in. I don't doubt that. But if the issue is recognition, we knew we had to redesign our motion. And that's the shift that really changed things. And that's the shift that matters. But to understand why that shift matters, you have to see how Microsoft sellers actually make their decisions. And so that's what I want to talk about next is, how does a Microsoft seller decide who to bring in? And for those of you that are familiar with either the old SMC or now SME&C, SMB business, that business was out of Las Colinas. And that's really, so that's where this sort of all came together for me was, back in the day, 2015, 2016, I was out at the Las Colinas office, and I remember the event vividly. And we were at a local pub having some pizza and beer. We had done a long day of meetings, and I was talking with a Microsoft seller about why these certain partners, why he kept bringing those partners into deals. I don't remember exactly how I asked him, but it was something along the lines of, why do you keep pulling the same partners, or why do you keep inviting them in? And he laughed, and he wasn't, pushing me away, but he was, he said to me, it's because, Rob, I don't have time to figure out the new ones. And that for me was that moment, I talked about on that last slide, which was, I lumped myself into this giant modern work category. And, he had said to me, he just didn't have time to figure out what that meant. And so when you think about it, Microsoft sellers, they're not free agents. They operate under very strict quota pressures. They have very defined roles. They're going after very defined sales cycles. And at the end of the day, they want to avoid risk. They do not want to introduce any risk or uncertainty into their deals. So I started thinking, they're not sitting there with all this extra time to interpret my value as a partner, they're moving from deal to deal, meeting to meeting. And if they have to figure out how to explain why I was the right partner, or they had to try and figure out, you know, why I would be a good alternative, it dawned on me, they're just not going to do it. They're busy, they're moving fast. They're not interested in having to decode what I do. And it wasn't that it was personal, it was purely operational for them. The seller's default behavior is to choose the option that requires the least amount of explanation. And that's why so much partner effort gets ignored. I still see it today. I talk to partners all the time, and they'll hear, I'm a data and AI partner, or I'm an Azure partner, or some people would say I'm an infrastructure modernization partner. And it's these broad sweeping categories that the Microsoft seller they don't have the time to try and figure out what or why. So that was one of those big epiphany moments, and this is kind of how it came together for me personally. Again, it's about the time pressure, the sales cycles that they're under, and just really avoiding the risk. So what I want to do now is talk a little bit more about why this effort gets ignored. Again, this, just thinking about myself and my business and the business of many of the partners I talk to and work with each day, they all have these certs. They go to the events, they run campaigns, they input referrals. They're all busy. That is, without a doubt, one thing I can see across every single partner I talk to is that we're all very busy. But here's the dangerous part of that. Busy feels like progress. And that happens today to all of us. Effort feels productive. It feels like we're doing something. But the thing that I want to land here for each and every one of you is that movement and effort are not the same thing. You can be working incredibly hard and still not move that needle inside the Microsoft ecosystem. Because if what you're doing doesn't map clearly how the seller is thinking, it's not going to register. Not negatively, it's just not going to register. And that's the trap that we fall into. And I know I've been guilty of this too, that most partners' effort never even makes it onto the Microsoft radar. We think we're doing all this good work. We're putting together all these programs. We're working hard. We're keeping busy. But Microsoft, not that they don't care, but they don't have time to acknowledge that, and it doesn't help them if it's not aligned to what they're trying to accomplish. So that's where this first belief shift that I want to talk about has to happen. It's that effort does not create traction. It's really about alignment. And that's the thing that, I didn't personally want to be true, is that, heck, I know how good we are. Whether you're bringing us into whatever different component of modern work, I felt like we were going to do a good job. But the reality is that Microsoft didn't see that alignment. And sure, I didn't want that to be true, because for me, the effort was comfortable. I could work harder. I could add more activity to my plate. I could add activity to my team's plate, and it felt good. It felt like we were doing stuff. It feels like we were in control. And at the end of the day, working on alignment doesn't feel that way. It feels kind of abstract. It's the conceptual. We're working more at a conceptual or strategic level than that tactical, just getting something done. And it kind of feels like something we can't measure. It's not easy to measure alignment. So I want to acknowledge that right up front that, measuring this concept of alignment is hard. It feels like something you don't have full control over. And so instinctively, when things aren't moving, I would default back to more effort, more certs, more outreach, more meetings. But that's where the uncomfortable part of this conversation happens, is that at the end of the day, Microsoft isn't rewarding the hustle. It rewards the clarity. You can support it with hustle, but if you don't have the clarity and the alignment, that hustle just doesn't matter. And if that seller can't instantly understand where you fit in, when to use you, and why you reduce risk, they're just going to move on. Not, again, I want to reiterate, it's not because you're bad, it's not personal. At the end of the day, it's just because you're unclear. If your value can't slot cleanly into their emotion, it's just not going to move. So that's the thing that I wanted to really land home, is that concept of this ability to land cleanly into a Microsoft motion. At the end of the day, that's why so many capable partners stay stuck. It's not that they're underqualified, not that they're underworking, it's they're unrecognized. And when clarity is missing in those relationships, eventually they'll only carry you so far. If you don't have clarity, even if it's someone you know, and this leans back into what I had mentioned a little earlier in our talk, was that when we started our business back in 2015, we were coming to the table with relationships. We had both been either individual contributors and on the technical side and on the sales side. So we had relationships, but what we didn't have was clarity and alignment to what those people needed at that moment. So that's where the next belief shift that I want to talk about begins. And I want to be the first to acknowledge relationships definitely matter. So let's start there. They matter a lot. But here's what experience is going to teach you. If you haven't already learned this lesson inside of Microsoft, you will learn it. But for those of us that have been around, I am fairly certain you've already learned this lesson, which is that people inside of Microsoft move, the territories shift, reorgs happen at a breakneck pace there, as far as I can tell, inside of Microsoft. And we all know that the incentives reset. Every July 1st, we have a whole new sort of set of MCAPS priorities, the Microsoft priorities. In October, we see incentives reset. And I've had those quarters where we felt super connected to the field. We felt deeply connected to those people we knew. We were having active conversations. We even had shared pipeline in some cases and strong trust. And then in one sweeping move, Microsoft changes everything. And we've seen this in the last 12 months. Massive layoffs, giant reorgs, people that we were working with gone literally overnight. People moved into completely different roles that they really have no insight into. They don't know if they can use us or not. And for us personally, that happened. And literally overnight, everything went quiet. Those people that we were working with, gone. Again, not that they had anything against us or that they were, not wanting to work with us, not negative to us. They had just moved on. They had been reorged somewhere else, or in a few cases, they had been removed from the organization, or they had left the organization. So, that's the thing that I want to land here, is that that's going to happen to you. And that's when you have the realization is that the relationships, they live in the people. We have those relationships with the people. And again, I want to reiterate how important those relationships are. But the thing that we have to understand as Microsoft partners that want to succeed in this ecosystem is that the motions don't live with the people, they live in the systems. We have to build motions inside of our businesses that survive the people. If your momentum depends on one person's memory of what you do, that's a very fragile place to be. But if your value is embedded in emotion, that's going to survive changes. Because we all know that even when Microsoft does these reorgs, they still will have people in those roles. It might be different people, but there will still be people in those roles. And if you have a motion that's aligned, you're going to survive that change. I guarantee it. And I've lived it multiple times over. So again, I want to reiterate, this isn't about abandoning relationships. You must have them. But it's about building something that outlasts the relationship. Because the people are moving, but the emotions, those are the things that are going to persist. And if you don't design for the motion, you end up rebuilding relationships over and over again. You start from ground zero over and over again. Not that you don't have to build the relationship from ground zero, but when you are having to build a relationship and then try and figure out emotion that might resonate, it's a very difficult task. And I'll tell you, it can be exhausting. In those early years when I would go to Las Colinas, and not have clearly defined motions, it was hard. It was much harder than when we had motions built out because those motions, they lived in the systems. And the question becomes, where do those signals actually live? And that's what I want to talk about now. For me, it was true, and I suspect it might be true for some of you, is that most partners treat Partner Center like it's an administrative task. It's a giant administrative burden, something that we have to keep current, something we have to update. It's something that at the end of the day we just had to tolerate. I mean, I know personally it felt like a boat anchor some days when I was having to deal with it. Um, but the real thing that I learned back then, and I believe is true more today than it was and it has ever been, is that Microsoft doesn't see it that way anymore. To Microsoft, Partner Center is telemetry. It tells the system who we are, it tells them what we do, tells them where we're active. And at the end of the day, it's reassurance or a level of trust that we're safe to bring into a deal. And we're seeing more and more of this in Partner Center. And I don't want to undervalue the energy and time it takes to keep Partner Center updated, to keep Partner Center current. I acknowledge that. But what I want to be clear about is that it's no longer about just clicking the buttons, checking the boxes. Today, Partner Center is all about signals. Those signals can live inside of your membership agreement with Microsoft. It can live inside of your marketplace offers inside a Partner Center. It can live as if you're in the CSP business. It can live inside of your incentives. Everything that Microsoft sees about us lands first in Partner Center. So again, I want to reiterate how important it is not to undervalue this. Again, it's not about just checking the boxes. It's about the signals that Partner Center sends to Microsoft. When you think about it, inside a large organization like Microsoft, nobody has time to evaluate partners from scratch. And so what Microsoft sellers are doing is that they have a bar and they can see in their own tools, do you meet these bars? And whether that's certification, specializations, and referrals, co-sell status, activity, you know, we we as partners need to be cognizant that they are looking inside of their tools, which are all fed by Partner Center, to check out who we are, what we do, how we do it. Can they trust us? And so if those signals inside of Partner Center are weak, they're inconsistent, they're unclear, they're not going to sit around and debate you. Let me be clear about that. They are not debating should I or shouldn't I. They're just moving on. So I want to be very clear on that. And it's not because they don't like you. It's because the system doesn't recognize you. So what does that mean for you? It means that visibility isn't discovered. You just don't randomly get visible. You have to engineer it. And once you understand that, that's when it becomes much easier to make that transition or that mindset shift in your head, is that we'll stop treating Partner Center like paperwork and start treating it like infrastructure, like it's a true part of the motion we're building with Microsoft. So now that you have the three shifts that I wanted to cover, which are effort isn't enough, that the relationships, they aren't as durable as we think they are, and that the signals drive recognition, that the things we do in Partner Center drive that recognition. And when those three things align, you're not having to hustle as hard. What you're doing at that point is you're installing a system now. And that's the real change that I want to talk about. And I coined this, and at RYZE, we've coined this the RYZE operating system. And it's really covered to align with the things that historically I know I treated separately. And what I see when I talk to these partners, and at RYZE, we talk to partners all day long, that these four things, most partners are doing that. They're treating them separately. They might have their messaging, they have some motions around relationships, they're thinking about the signals, and then finally, how do they activate all of this and make it a repeatable, scalable business? And that's the thing that a system does for you. It brings everything together. It brings all of those things that we talked about together. And when they work together, the sellers don't have to guess. They already know when to pull you in. And for me personally, that's what was missing. Back in 2015, when I started that Microsoft partner, this was the thing that was missing for me. It was the system. It was the ability to build something that I could scale on top of. It was it was moving from that sort of one-off motion of, oh, I should put this thing in co-sell, or I should reach out to this person. What was missing is the ability to have this codified in a way that I could teach to my field sellers, that everyone on my team understood. They understood what we were doing. They understood why we were doing it. Because at the end of the day, Microsoft wasn't waiting for us to learn the system. They weren't waiting for us to build the system. They were going. They were bringing people into deals. They were working with partners that had already figured this out. And so for me, this was the big aha moment that I was able to bring together and really start to move at scale. And so that's one of the things that I wanted to share with you, is that we bring this all together, but we have to remember that Microsoft has a rhythm to it. the quarters close, the budget shifts, the incentives reset. We've talked about all of that. And the one thing that really I want to hone in on is that Microsoft's attention, and when I say Microsoft, I mean the specialists, I mean the sellers, their attention gets reallocated to whatever those priorities are for that fiscal year or for that quarter. Or in some cases, actually in many cases, what the priorities are based on their scorecard. And so when you think about Microsoft's priorities, at the end of the day, that all boils down to a scorecard for a Microsoft seller. And here's the part that most partners misunderstand is that if you're waiting to figure this out, you're not in neutral. You're literally going backwards. You are being dropped off the radar completely. And if you don't change how the system sees you, the system just adapts without you. The sellers are focused on their scorecards, which are aligned to the Microsoft priorities, and they need to move fast, and they are not going to wait around. So the longer you operate in sort of these silos, you're essentially teaching Microsoft that you're not part of their motion. You're not helping them move their ball forward. So that waiting is training the system, and maybe not intentionally. We're not intentionally saying, hey, I'm trying to delay, but structurally, we're forming some habits here inside the sales organization in Microsoft, and we can either form good habits or we can form habits that are just not there. They don't see. So the question isn't, should we eventually fix alignment? The question is, what does another cycle of invisibility not being on the radar reinforce for Microsoft? Are we just further away? That's the thing that I want you to think about is you have to go beyond thinking about just the alignment. You have to think about the impact of not being visible. What is that saying to Microsoft? And that brings me to, this next slide, which is really about what happens when you get the system installed. And that, I want to be clear, is we're not talking about content here. We're talking about installing something that is repeatable and scalable, so that we stop guessing and we start making sense to sellers. This is actually how you're going to change how sellers see you. It's not about getting louder messaging. It's not about more one-off relationships. It's about creating the motions that the Microsoft ecosystem can understand. And for me, that really brings us to this next logical step is the system isn't going to install itself. And it doesn't get installed by just watching content, going to learn.microsoft.com and consuming another dozen pages of content on what's new or what's changed. That's why we built this RYZE operating system. We built it around delivering some guided group execution so that you're installing the system that we saw earlier alongside other partners following the same operating model so that you can take your motions, which are individual and unique to you, and build those on top of a system. So the clarity comes from the shared patterns, the progress comes from applying those patterns and those systems to your motions. So whether you're a modern work partner, whether you're a data and AI partner, whether you're an MSP or an SI, it's about installing a system that's going to resonate with Microsoft. And that's, at the end of the day, this is how alignment becomes operational. It's how you scale your business. And again, I just want to reiterate that timing matters here, because the longer you wait, the more folks inside of Microsoft move on without you. And so, we're in this window now where we all know Microsoft operates in these cycles. They're half-year cycles. They're every July, we're resetting. Every October, we're doing some changes. And new motions are getting prioritized. What we have to be aware of is that right now we're in Microsoft's second half of the year, and they're moving fast to close deals. And at the same time, we have to be prepared for these resets to happen. And we know that we're only, 5 months or 4 months away, 5 months away from these resets starting again, where attention is going to get reallocated. And what we don't want to be is having to restart from zero every time. And that's where the system really helps. Those partners who are structurally aligned are going to get pulled forward. And those partners that structurally align quickly with the MCAP's priorities are the ones that are going to go along into the next fiscal year. So being active today with their motions and not missing a beat going into the next fiscal year. And the partners who are not, they just are going to reset and be dropped off the radar. So this isn't about adding pressure, it's about a rhythm. It's, Microsoft needs us as partners to be in the same rhythm with them. And they're just going to adapt whether you act or not. They're not going to care one way or another. What they care about is, are you aligned with where they're at today? And if your signals are unclear when that attention resets, you just fall into that sort of invisibility position. But if your positioning is already embedded when that attention resets, that just reinforces for the Microsoft field teams, you are the right partner. We are going to continue moving forward. And so that's why this window matters now, because we're in a cadence with Microsoft. We will always be in that cadence that Microsoft operates in. They have an H1, they have an H2, and we have to operate within that cadence. And when we hit the end of H2, we have to move right into that next cadence. And one of the big changes I'm seeing in the Microsoft ecosystem, historically, for those of us that have been in the system for a while, come July, things would taper off and really, we could go a month, 2 months, in some cases 3 months before activity. That's not the case anymore. Microsoft is really pushing hard for its sellers and its specialists to move actively into that next year. So again, this for me is so important that you understand these windows that we operate in, and that you don't miss opportunities or fall victim to the changes having drop you off the radar. And that brings us to the last topic here about risk. It really is something else you have to be aware of, is that you cannot show up as more risk, and that change each year is where that risk is reinserted. Every year that risk revives itself to the Microsoft field sellers. Are you the right partner? So I just want to be very clear on that. And so for me, again, and for us at RYZE, we want to solve that problem for you. We want to create this system that says if you show up, you apply all the things correctly, and you install the system, we're going to make sure that you don't experience that level of risk that many other partners fall victim to. We're going to work with you to make sure that it's right, that you move into each quarter, each half, and each new fiscal year in a way that reduces the amount of risk you present to a Microsoft seller. And that's, at the end of the day, what we built this entire system on, was helping you as a partner reduce that risk and to install the system inside your business in a way that makes sense for you. So what I want to share is that if you do decide that this is something you want to invest or look at, know that it includes not only the group coaching, but 1 year of structured meetings where we'll get together once a week and we'll talk through where everyone's at. We'll go through the individual motions that might be changing. We'll go through the programs that are changing. Every week you have a touch point to see, is this the right thing for me? Should I be changing what I'm doing? It's not just a pile of content. It's not just access to a bunch of videos. It's real installation. And I will say that if you're a partner that just wants to dip your toe in the waters with Microsoft, this is not for you. This is for partners who want coherence, they want predictability. And if that's you, then what I'm going to say is the next step isn't just to sign up. The next step is to book some time, book some time with me. I want you to jump on this 30-minute working session. And in that session, it's not a sales call, it's a conversation. We're going to look at what you're doing. We're going to look at your business. We're going to talk about what your Microsoft motion is, where your sort of signal strength is inside of Microsoft, or if it isn't, and whether the system is right for you. So my ask for each and every one of you is that if this is something you're interested in, take the time to either go to that URL or scan that QR code and book some time where we can get together. And again, we'll talk about what installation looks like. And if it's for you, you'll know quickly. Either way, you'll leave with clarity. And it isn't about convincing you that this is the thing for you. It's about determining, are you ready for it? And if you are serious about installing a system in a structured way, go ahead and book the time there in our calendar, and we will look forward to seeing you. So with that, I'm going to pause. We've got a few minutes. If anyone has any questions about what we talked about today, I'm happy to cover those.
Yeah, if anybody has any questions, you can just put them in either the Q&A or in the chat. Raise your hand. Can you clarify the pricing again?
I sure can. So the pricing is $3,500 for the entire year. So you sign up once, you get the entire system. So the process of installing the system, the modules that you need to work through to install the system, and then you have access for the entire year to the group coaching, so that as you're working through the system, you have someone to reach out to and talk with. You'll hear from other people that are installing the system alongside you, the challenges they're facing. And for me, that's one of the most valuable things, is that we talk as a group. We all do so many different things, and we do our things in a different way. We bring different value propositions to the market. So we're talking about the system and learning from each other about installing that system. And that entire system is $3,500 for the year.
Awesome. We have another question. How did you phrase the 3 things you need to state again? It was something like, what is it you do, how you do it, and where you reduce risk, question mark.
Sure. Let me bounce back here in the presentation a little bit. So I think what you're referring to is the sort of the 3 beliefs. If that's what you're referring to, it's the effort, and the relationships and the risk. So it's really understanding, where you're investing your time and your energy. Is that the thing that's going to move the needle, or are you just being busy? And then when it comes to the relationships, it's about, and let me just see if I can pop back to the last slide here. Yeah, here we go. We talked about this, the relationships being not the thing that is going to be the end all be all for you. It's very important, but it's really the motion that is going to survive all these changes. So if you think about, hey, I know this person ends up moving to a different role, a different group, or ends up leaving Microsoft, you're left dead in the water. But if you have these motions installed, you have that reassurance that the motion is going to survive the person. And then finally, we talked about the last one, which was Partner Center. Um, so I hope that's what you were asking, and if not, feel free to drop us an email. You can I can answer the question further. And I think Sandy, I saw some more questions pop in there.
Is the annual payment the only option?
It's not, but it's something we can cover if you want to just book some time on the calendar. We can cover other payment options. Thanks, Sandy, for sharing the email there.
Yep. I think we've hit everything that's been put in that chat panel. I had a couple in the Q&A. What types of partners are in your group? We are an MSP.
Sure. So we have a combination of systems integrators, managed services providers, MSSP, so the managed security service providers. And then we also have a few ISVs as well, because the system is not limited to one specific type of partner. The things that we go through are relevant to um, each different type of partner. You'll just leverage different points in the system depending on what you do. So for MSPs, as an example, one of the really important things is driving MRR. And so what we want to do is help you think through as you're building these offers or these co-sell motions, as Microsoft calls them. Do they align with one, what Microsoft's trying to accomplish, and two, do they align with what you're trying to drive in your business, which is MRR, ARR? So we see a number of different types of partners there.
All right, here's another one. Is this more training or is it actual execution?
So for me, I've always been a big believer that training is fine, but execution is the thing that makes the difference. So the entire system is built around the execution of this system you see on the screen here and the implementation of that system. For me, that's the critical component. If I want to deliver is make sure that you as a partner are installing a system that's durable, scalable, and repeatable. So that's for me, execution is the core of what we're doing here. And again, I'm happy to talk through this with you. Just book some time on my calendar or our calendar, and we'll walk through that with you.
Let's see. What if we do this and Microsoft still doesn't engage?
So if Microsoft's not engaging, that's telling me that something isn't quite right. So you have to think about, we talked about the concept of alignment. And so more times than not, when there's no engagement from Microsoft, it's around the alignment. And I'll just share a short story from one of our members. They were in the Microsoft Fabric arena, and this is a very small partner in terms of size. And so they were concerned that would Microsoft engage just because of their size? And the unique thing for them is that they played in a space that Microsoft is very interested in growing. They're playing in a customer base that Microsoft is very interested in nurturing and growing. And so, what we worked on is sharing an offer that could resonate with Microsoft. And in this case, the partner was able to identify an opportunity, bring it to Microsoft, and they almost immediately engaged. So I would argue that the lack of engagement is really a symptom of a emotion that's not resonating with the Microsoft field, or worse, not resonating with your customer base. But I suspect that's not the case. I think that It's really, is it aligned to what Microsoft's trying to achieve? And that's really the crux of what you have to pressure test each and every quarter, each and every half, each and every reset with Microsoft is, do my offers still align to the MCAP's priorities?
Great. We've
Great.
got just a couple more minutes here, so I'll get one quick one in. Um, is it competitive? Or are we expected to share sensitive information?
No, it is not competitive, and no, you're not expected to share sensitive information. What I will say is that the one of the real values, and really something that I didn't appreciate until later as months went by and quarters went by, that the value the partners are getting is really that collaboration, hearing how other partners are working through their problems and learning together, sharing insights together, because everybody's business is so different, and how we operate it, how we lead it, how it goes to market. And so I don't ever expect a partner to share information like that. Um, what I ask and what we ask is just be curious about the system, about working with Microsoft. Ask good questions about understanding and decoding the Microsoft systems. And when we do that, we all learn together. And that's part of what we as RYZE tries to bring to the table is each and every week we share content, but more importantly, we try and bring Microsoft into the discussions so that Microsoft sellers or Microsoft employees are sharing their vantage and viewpoints from the inside. So that's very important, and that's a big part of what we do.
Awesome. Well, we're 2 minutes to the top of the hour. I'm sure other people have meetings to go to, so I think we can wrap things up.
Great. Well, I'd like to thank everybody that if you're still here, thank you for joining us today. And again, please go ahead and book some time on my calendar if this is the right thing for you. Have a great day.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.